Okay, good day, everybody, and welcome to today's class. And today we'll be looking at product development lifecycle 2. In our last class, we talked about product development lifecycle, and we were unable to finish up. So today we are going to continue from where we stopped, and we are going to get right into it. So in our last class, we were only able to cover the first stage. So today we are going to get right into the second stage. Now, if you were not a part of our last class, I would advise you go to YouTube and follow suit because we have a lot to cover today. As a result, we will not be able to go over the recap. So the recording is on YouTube, so do well to go over it. So let's start with stage 2 today. Inside. All right, so stage 2 is idea screening and validation. So we are going to get right into it. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me clearly and you can see my screen. Thank you, Adana. All right, so stage 2 is arguably the most commercially important stage of the entire PDLC, the Product Development Life Cycle. I hope you still remember our abbreviations. And it is also one of the most frequently skipped or rushed, stage of the PDLC. Teams are usually very excited about an idea and they want to move forward. After stage 1, which is the idea validation, they want to skip into, other stage and then they try to skip this particular stage, right? There's an energy and momentum in the early stages of product ideation that makes it feel, counterproductive to slow down and ask some hard questions. But those hard questions are precisely what this stage is designed to ask. And the answer to them are what determines whether the product you eventually build has any chance of succeeding in the market. Now, let me start by being very explicit about what screening is and what it is not, right? Screening is not a creativity killing exercise that is designed to make product teams very cautious or make them slow down. It is rather a resource protection exercise that is designed to make sure that the significant investment of time, money, and people that comes in that stage, that they follow the direct opportunities, right? They are directed towards a particular opportunity that have the highest probability of delivering real value, because at the end of the day, that is what a product is about, delivering real value. Now, every hour your engineering team spends building a product that nobody wants is an hour that was taken away from building a product that somebody actually needed. Screening is how you protect your most valuable resource, which is the attention and effort of your team. Your team should not be targeting things blindly. They shouldn't be putting in effort into things that people are not going to value, right? For being, you help them target their effort into something that is going to be valuable and usable from, being wasted on ideas that should have been discontinued or eliminated before anyone started building it. Now, the first screening tool is what I like to call fail-proof testing. And it works like this. Before you do any quantitative scoring or financial analysis, you create a list of non-negotiable criteria that every idea must meet to qualify for further development. Now, these criteria represent the absolute minimum standard for a viable product opportunity. If an idea fails to meet even one of these criteria, it is eliminated almost immediately, regardless of how exciting it sounds or how you feel about it, right? Or how your stakeholders are being very, very enthusiastic about it. Now, what goes on that list of non-negotiable criteria, as you might be asking now? The specifics depend on your company and your market, but common criteria includes things like the problem must, be experienced by a minimum number of users that makes the market large enough to justify the investment. The solution must be technically visible with the team, right? And your budget must be available. You must have a current budget available. The products must also align with the company's strategic direction and core competencies. The unit economics must be viable. I hope you are taking notes of all of these things. Right now, the regulatory environment must, right? It must not present an, insurmountable barrier to the market entry. Any idea that cannot meet all of these basic tests should be eliminated before the team invests any further time in it. Now, note, it varies depending on your team, depending on the company, depending on the product. These criteria, they vary. Like what you do as a PM is you shape them according to your product, according to the company, according to the idea. Now, after the non-negotiable criteria test, you move to evaluation metrics. Now, this is where you score each of the surviving ideas against a broader set of criteria on a scale from 0 to 10. The criteria at this level are more debatable, right, than the non-negotiable criteria. The non-negotiables, if there's any comma, you just remove it. But this one, there's room for a bit of a debate, right? Which is why they are scored rather than, binary. Now, criteria at this level might include things like how strong is the user pain that the product is trying to address. That's the pain point. How large is the addressable market? How differentiated is our potential solution from what already exists in the market? How strong is our competitive moat? Meaning, how difficult could it be for a competitor to copy our solution? How well does this opportunity align with our company's long-term vision? And how quickly, could we realistically build and launch a version of this product? Now, each of these criteria, they get weighed based on how important it is, right? Then you multiply the score by the weight of each criteria and then the sum total. Now, this might sound like mathematics, but as we move on, you're going to understand. Right now, the ideas with the highest total score after this analysis are the ones that advances to the next stage. This approach is valuable not just because it produces a ranked list of ideas, but because the process of scoring forces honest, right? If you are if you're counting from 1 to 10 and you're trying to score the person that is unable to count from 1 to 10, it is easy, right? You to give an honest answer because it's 1 to 10. Everybody knows that from 3 is 4. If somebody jumps from 3 to 7, the person is not correct. So it forces you to give an honest opinion. It forces you to give structured conversations about the real strengths and weaknesses of each idea. Now, those conversations, oftentimes, they bring out assumptions and concerns that would never come up in a normal standard brainstorming, that is from stage 1. Now, financial evaluation is the third component of screening. And it is where a lot of product managers feel less comfortable because it requires working with numbers and projections. But let me be somewhat very clear about something. You do not need to be a finance, professional to do this very, very well, because some persons might be getting scared. Oyin Damola, help me mute your mic, thank you. Some people might already be getting scared that this one we are talking about numbers and finance. Don't worry, you do not have to be a finance expert, right? You do not need to be a professional to do this very well. You need to be able to answer just 2 basic questions with reasonable accuracy. And one is, how much will it cost to build and launch this product? And how much revenue could it realistically generate within a defined period? Typically, the first 1 or 2 years. Now, if the cost is significantly higher than the realistic value, the product is not financially viable and should not proceed, regardless of how innovative the idea is, right? Then, the SWOT analysis. That is the 4th screening tool. And it gives you a structured way to assess each shortlisted idea across 4 dimensions, right? Strengths. What does this product have, going for? What advantages does the processed or proposed solution have over what already exists? What capabilities does your team have that will make you particularly well suited to build this? So that's where you derive your strength from. Now, the next one is weaknesses, right? Where is the proposed solution vulnerable? This is your solution. What aspect of it is vulnerable? What technical, operational, or market challenge is it likely to face along the line? What capabilities do you currently lack that you would need to build or to hire for? Now, the third one is opportunities. What external factors work in this product's favor, right? Are the market trend working in its favor? Are the technologies working in its favor? The development or, regulatory changes that create a favorable environment for the solution. Are all of these things working in the favor of your market or against it, of your product rather, or against it? And then you have the threats, right? What external factors work against this product? Just like you have things that work in the favor of your product, you can also have things that works against it, right? Who are likely, who are people that are likely going to be your competitors, right? What are their responses, right? What regulatory risks already exist that is going to work against your product? What could change in the market that would determine the product's viability? All of these questions and more needs to be answered. Now, beyond the formal screening tool, stage 2 also involves early validation activities, right? That are more They are more of a qualitative analysis in nature instead of quantitative. Now, the most important of these is the user interview. Even at this early stage, before you have designed anything, before you start building anything, before you even start to write your product requirement, right? You should be talking to real people, or you must have spoken to real people who represent your target user and asking them about the problem you are considering solving. The goal at this point is not to try and pitch your solutions to them, right? The goal at this point is to confirm that the problem is as real and as painful as you believe it to be, or as you are perceiving it to be. Now you ask them to describe their current experience with the product, the problem, right? You ask what they currently do to try and address that problem, and how much it affects them when they do, right? You ask them what they wish existed that does not currently exist. Then you get to hear their own ideas and side of what you're trying to build without outrightly telling them about what you're trying to build. Now, if you're talking to 10 people who match your target user profile, and let's say 8 of them describe the problem in vivid, specific, emotional terms and expresses a genuine desire for a better solution, now that is a strong validation signal. But if you're talking to 10 people and 5 of them look at you very blankly, like they don't understand what you're saying, when you describe the problem, and say maybe they are feeling frustrated about it and all of that, and it doesn't send any signal to them, it doesn't give them any cause of concern, then the problem might not be as painful as you believed, and you need to reconsider before proceeding, going further. Problem validation surveys work on the same principle, but at a larger scale. You can create a short survey that describes the problem space without revealing your proposed solution, and you send it to maybe a sample of your target user population. The questions over there should be designed, to assess how often the users experience the problem, how painful it is when they do, and what they are doing currently to address that problem. Now, the results should give you a quantitative picture of the problem's severity across a larger sample than an individual interview can provide. Now, as you can see, there's a balance for both. You do individual interviews, let's say maybe 10 people, and then you still do a validation survey. The survey might definitely would be a soft digital kind of survey where you have to create Google Forms and then you share it around, while the other user research is meeting people one-on-one and talking to them. Now, at the end of stage 2, the PM must make a clear, documented decision. The idea either advances to stage 3 or it does not. And crucially, the rationale for that decision must be written down. If the idea advances, you document why the evidence supports the proceeding and what the key assumptions are, that needs to be validated in, subsequent stages. If the idea is eliminated, you document why as well, so that if the same idea or a similar one surfaces in the future, the team has a record for the previous evaluation and does not waste time re-evaluating from scratch. That is why as a PM, documenting must be 5 and 6. Now, the cost of skipping this stage is very enormous and well documented. Companies around the world spend millions building products that nobody wanted because they skipped or rushed the screening and validation stage or process. They built on the assumption that the problem was real without actually confirming it. They built on the assumption that the market was large enough without measuring it. And they also built on the assumption that users would pay for the solution without testing it. And when the product launched to an, indifferent market, they had nothing to blame except the decision not to validate before building. So as a product manager, your responsibility to your company and to your team is to make sure that those things I just mentioned never happens, right? They should not happen on your watch. Screening and validation are how you fulfill that responsibility of not allowing your team to build into an indifferent market. I hope we are still following. So stage 3, market research and customer insight. After an idea has passed through stage 2 and the team has confirmed that the problem is real, the opportunity is now worth pursuing. And the company has the capability and resources to build a viable solution. Most product teams, make a very natural but very costly mistake. After that, they try to go straight from we are building this to let us start designing the solution. And the reason that it is a mistake is this. At the point where stage 2 ends, you know that a problem exists and it is worth solving. All right. Okay. Let's do this. Give me a thumbs up if you can still hear me, please. All right, thank you. Thank you, guys. So I said that the reason that is a mistake is at the point where stage 2 ends, you know that a problem exists, right? And that problem is worth solving. What you do not yet know is everything you need to know about that problem and the people who experience it in order to design the right solution. Stage 3 is where you try to close that gap because you can only try. So stage 3 is called market research and customer insight. And the goal is simply to state and demanding to, execute. Before you design anything, you must develop the deepest possible understanding of 3 things. Who your user really is, the context in which they experience the problem, and the landscape of existing solutions they are already aware of and potentially using. Now, you know that if somebody has a problem, the person is already looking for a solution. So that means they probably have seen other potential solutions or they are already using those potential solutions. Now, let me explain why each of these 3 things matter so profoundly, right? Now, understanding who your user really is matters because the right solution for one type of user can it can completely differ, right? It can completely differ from another user's, kind of solution, even if both users have the same underlying problem. Now, consider the problem of managing, let's say, personal finances. A 22-year-old recent graduate who stays somewhere in maybe Lagos, managing their first salary, has that problem. So does a 45-year-old business owner who stays somewhere in maybe Abuja, managing cash flow, across multiple revenue streams. Now, the both of them are experiencing a financial management challenge. But the solution that works for the recent graduate is simple budgeting app, let's say, with clear categories and gentle reminders, would be completely inadequate for the business owner. The business owner probably needs a multi-account tracking, invoicing, tax preparation, and cash flow forecasting. Now, if you try to build one product that serves both users without deeply understanding each of them, you will end up with a product that does neither the job very well, a product that is not serving, your customers very well. Now, the depth of your user understanding directly determines the relevance of your solution. Understanding the context in which users experience the problem matters because, context kind of shapes behavior in ways that, are not obvious from a surface level description of the problem. A user who tries to make a digital payment and fails when they are alone at home in a comfortable environment has a different experience of that of a user who fails when they are standing at a crowded market, maybe a crowded market store or a vendor waiting impatiently and the customers, forming a queue behind them. The frustration of the latter is not as high as the former, right? That frustration, that urgency, the social pressure that the customers are putting on that person is not the same as somebody who is just comfortably sitting in his or her apartment and trying to do a transaction. Right? It is not the same. The emotional stakes are completely different in those two contexts. Even though the technical failure might look or sound identical, right? They are not the same. Now, a product designed without understanding the context of, use will kind of optimize for a scenario that does not match the reality of how and when users actually need it. I hope I'm making sense. Now, understanding the competitive landscape also matters because your product does not exist in a vacuum. When you launch your product, you are launching into a market where users already have options. Some of those options are direct competitors to your product. Now, those direct competitors, their products, are designed to solve the same problem like yours. Some are indirect alternatives, right? Products that users have adapted to maybe partially solve the problem, even though they were not designed for it, right? If you do not understand what those options are, what they do well, and what they fall short doing, you cannot position your product meaningfully in the market. You will build features that kind of duplicate what already exists rather than filling the gaps, right, that those already existing products are not filling or where they are falling short of. You will price inappropriately, right, to what users are already expecting based on what they already use. And you will miss the specific differentiations that will make your product the obvious choice for users who are dissatisfied with the existing options. Now, let me talk about how you actually conduct this research in practice, because the method matters as much as the intentions. Now, user interview at stage 3 are different from the brief validation conversation you had in stage 2, right? At stage 2, you were asking some quick targeted questions to confirm that the problem is real and widespread, right? At stage 3, you are having longer, deeper, and more intense conversation designed to develop a rich, detailed understanding of the user's world. Right now, you're done with the product. You're trying to understand the user. You're trying to get into the user's world. At this point, you're not asking leading questions that are designed to confirm your assumptions. At this point, you are asking open-ended questions, right? That invites the user to share their experience in their own words, not in the words you're expecting to hear. Now, a good stage 3 interview questions should sound something like, let's say you walk up to somebody and you be like, walk me through the last time you encountered this problem. You name the problem, you state the problem. Tell me exactly what happened from the beginning, right? What did you do to try and address it? How did that work out? What would you have, what would have made that solution better for you? What does a good day look like when it comes to this area of your life or work? What does a frustrating day look like? What would you want, to exist that does not currently exist? Are you noticing that none of these questions mentions your product? None of them describes a solution you already have in mind. They are entirely focused on helping you understand the user's experience as fully and accurately as possible, right? These questions are very open-ended so that you are not boxing them in to give a specific answer. At this point, they're just talking and talking and talking, and all you're doing at that point is taking notes and jotting things down. Now, the insights that come from stage 3 interviews are sometimes very surprising. Users will describe aspects of the problem that you yourself did not see or anticipate. They are going to express needs that your initial concept did not even have in mind to address. They will describe some workarounds and adaptations that have developed their, review for your product without you even having to break your head about it. All of that information is valuable. It will shape your product design in ways that, that is purely user-centric, because as product managers, we are user-centric. And it's also going to shape your product design in ways that internal brainstorming could never do. Those brainstorms that you sit down in the office to talk about, they could never bring out those aspects of shaping of the product. Now, competitive analysis at stage 3 goes significantly deeper than the surface level, right? The surface level scan that you have during your idea generation. This competitive analysis at stage 3 is a lot deeper than that. At this point, you are now systematically documenting everything that matters about each significant player in your market. What is their product? Who is their primary user? What features do they offer? How are they priced? What is their distribution strategy? What do users say they love about them? What do users say they hate about them, right? Where do they have known weaknesses or known strengths that users are constantly either frustrated or happy about? Where have they invested product development resources recently, which reveals, where they believe the market is going? All of those questions, all those competitive analysis questions that you do for your competitors is very, very important. Now, this analysis is not just about understanding what your competitors are doing. It is about identifying where the market is underserved, right? And where your product has the clearest opportunity to be genuinely better than what already exists. A competitive analysis done well will reveal specific concrete gap in the market that your product can target. It will also reveal areas where the market is well served, where competing would require being only marginally better than a well-established product, which is an extremely difficult position to, succeed from. Because you cannot be marginally better, you have to be far better, right? So what you do is target where they are not, serving the users very well. And customer journey mapping is one of the most powerful tools in stage 3 and one of the most underused by product teams that, product teams that are in a hurry to get to design and development. A customer journey map is something that traces the complete experience a user has when trying to solve the problem you are addressing. From the very first moment they became aware of, that they became aware that the problem exists, through every step they take to try and address the problem, all the way to the resolution or the frustration when the resolution is not possible. Now, as we proceed, we are going to talk about customer journey mapping or user journey mapping, so don't be afraid, right? Now, a well-constructed journey map shows you several things that are invisible without it. It shows you where users first encounter the problem and how they initially interpret it, because users do not always recognize the root cause of their difficulty immediately. It shows you where users look for solutions and what sources they trust for guidance, which has implications for your distribution and marketing strategy. It shows you every point in the journey where users experience friction, where they experience confusion or failure, because those points are where your product needs to perform most reliably, so that your product does not end up being one of those products that they also get to that point and feel confused or frustrated. And it shows you the emotional state of the user at each point in the journey, because a product that addresses the rationale, right, the rationale needs of its user without accounting for the emotional states will always feel cold and unresponsive to those users, and you don't want your product to be one of those. Give me a thumbs up if you can still hear me, please. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Now, at the end of stage 3, the PMs should be able to synthesize all of the research, right, collected through interviews, competitive analysis, and journey mapping into a clear, organized set of insights that will guide every decision made in the stages that follow, right? These insights typically take the form of user personas, which are detailed, research-grounded, descriptions of the primary user types of the product and the needs that they serve. They take the forms of, clarity. They take the forms of problem statements that, precisely articulate what the product needs to solve, for whom and in what context, and all of that. And they take that and put it together into a competitive positioning map that shows where the product will sit in the market relative to existing solutions. And they take the forms of a set of design principles that will guide the design and development, design and development work in later stages. So they don't just jump from idea to design and to development. Now, the work done in stage 3 is the foundation on which everything else is built. If this foundation is done poorly, it means it's going to be weak. If the foundation is weak, every subsequent stage will be building on an incorrect assumption, and the cost of correcting those assumptions increases with every stage that passes. The teams that invest properly in stage 3 are the teams whose design and development stages are smoother, they are faster and very well aligned. And they are the teams whose products, when they are launched, actually work the way users need them to. So, moving on to stage 4, concept development and prototyping. Now, we have now done the foundational work, right? Before, when we graduate to stage 4, it means we have done the foundational work. We have identified a problem that is worth solving. We have screened and validated the opportunity. We have done some deep market research and developed a thorough understanding of our user and our competitive landscape. Now, stage 4 is where all of that foundational work gets applied for the first time to the actual shape of the solution you are going to build. And it is one of the most exciting stages of the PDLC, the product development lifecycle, because this is where the product starts to feel real for the first time, even though it is still entirely on paper and in prototyping tools. Now, let me get started by explaining concept development, because this term is used a bit loosely, and I want to give you a precise understanding of what it actually involves. A product concept is a detailed, structured description of the proposed product from the user's perspective. Notice that I said from the user's perspective, not from the engineering perspective, and not from the business perspective, right? The concept document describes what the product will do for the user, how easy it will be for the user to understand and use it, what the user's experience of interacting with it will feel like, how it compares to what the user currently uses to address the problem, and what it will cost the user in terms of money, time, and learning efforts. It is written in plain language, not technical language. It is written as if you're explaining the product to a potential user, not to an engineer or to an investor. So, as a PM, your writing skills are also going to be tested because it has to come into play. Now, why is this framing very important? Well, it is important because the user's perspective forces you to stay grounded in the user value rather than drifting into technical features for their own sake. So this means that if you're explaining to your designers or to your dev guys, you're not going to explain like you're explaining the product to them. You're going to explain it from the user's POV, the user's point of view to them, because they need to also understand as a user to be able to design and build as a user. It is very easy for product teams, especially those with strong engineering cultures, to describe a product in terms of its technical architecture and features specification without ever asking whether those technical choices, actually translate into a better experience for the users. Now, writing the concept document from the user's perspective, it prevents everybody from drifting apart. Once the concept is documented, you test it with, who is writing on my screen? Please do not write on my screen. Silvia, be careful with your mouse. Once the concept is documented, you test it with real users before you design or build anything, right? Concept testing is the process of sharing your written description of the proposed product with real members of your target user group and collecting their honest reaction to it. You're not trying to pitch to them at this point, right? You're basically asking them to evaluate whether this concept would genuinely address the problem they experience. Does it make sense to them? Does it appeal to them? Would they use it? What would make it more useful or more appealing? What concerns do they have about it? Now, you might be thinking, if we did all of those research that we did, all those analysis, why are we still showing it to them? Yes, you still have to show it to them. What if along the way of putting together your concept documents, you made one or two mistakes? Yes, you still have to. Remember, we are user-centric. You still have to show it to them. Now, the feedback from the concept testing often leads to significant refinement of the original concept before the team moves to prototyping. A user might tell you that the core idea is appealing, and then another thing that another reason why you get to share this with users is maybe after writing the concept document, you can now share it with other broad users, right? People that you didn't get to do the analysis with, people that didn't get to answer your surveys and all of that. So yeah, just to put that out there. Now, a user at this point might tell you that the core idea is appealing, but the pricing model will prevent them from adopting it, that's from using it. Another user might tell you that a feature you considered peripheral is actually the most important thing to them. Another might point out a use case you had not considered, right? That you had not considered would be, let's say, maybe something you had not considered would require a capability you had not planned to build. All of that, right? So all of that information is valuable and it is available to you at the stage of the cost of a few hours of user research. The same information, if you discovered after 6 months of development, would cost significantly more to act on. Now, the correction that the user is making now, if after maybe you ignored this stage or this point and then you went ahead to build the product, and then the user point out this same concern 6 months later after your product is out, it's going to cost you more trying to fix that. But now at this concept stage, it does not cost you anything, right? So now let me explain the gain-pain ratio, as you can see on your screen, because this is a framework that I want you to apply not just in this stage, but throughout your career as a product manager. Now, the gain-pain ratio is a way of evaluating how much value a product delivers to the user. Give me a thumbs up if you can still hear me, please. Oh, okay, thank you. So the gain pain ratio is a way of evaluating how much value a product delivers to the user, right? Relative to how much effort the user has to invest in understanding and using it. I'll take that again. It is a way of evaluating how much value, right, a product serves or delivers to the user relative to how much effort the user has to invest in understanding and using that product. Gain refers to the benefits of the benefits that the product delivers. Now, what does the user get from using the product? What problem does it solve? What time does it save them? What frustration does it eliminate? And all of that. What joy or satisfaction does it provide? So that is the positive side of the equation. While the pain refers to the effort the user must invest to get those benefits. How much do they have to learn before they can use the product effectively? How much does it disrupt their existing habits and workflows? How many steps does it require them to take to complete their primary tasks? How much do they have to pay for it relative to their, perception of its value? Now, pain is the friction and the cost on the negative side of the equation. A high gain pain ratio means that the product delivers significant benefit for a relatively low investment of effort. Products with high gain pain ratios are easy to adopt and easy to advocate for. Users feel that the product is obviously worth using because the value they get out of it is large, relative to what they have to put in. Now, let's go back to using WhatsApp. WhatsApp has a very high gain pain ratio. You install it, you verify your phone number, you can immediately start messaging anyone, right? Anyone else who has your number or who has WhatsApp. Now, the setup takes less than 2 minutes. The benefit is instant and substantial. A low gain pain ratio means the product requires significant user investment but delivers benefits that feels proportionally small in return. Products with low gain pain ratios struggle with adoption, even if the underlying idea is good, is sound, because users are not willing to invest significant learning and behavior change for a modest improvement over what they already use. Now, when you are developing your concept and testing your prototype, you should be continuously asking questions like, are we maximizing the gain for our users? Are we minimizing the pain? And the current gain pain ratio, are they compelling enough to drive adoption against the alternatives that already exist in the market? All of those concern kind of questions. Now let's talk about prototyping, because this is one of the most powerful tools in the entire PDLC and one of the most misunderstood as well. Now, a prototype is a clickable interactive simulation of the product. It looks like a real product. It feels like a real product. A user can tap buttons, navigate between screens, and experience the basic flow of the product. But there is no actual functionality behind it, right? No database is being, queried for those of us that are developers. right? There's no database that is being queried, no transactions are being processed, no real data is being stored or retrieved. It is a sophisticated illusion kind of design to stimulate the user experience before any engineering resources have been committed to building the actual product. Now, why is this important and why is this valuable? Well, it is because it allows you to test the product experience with real users at the point in the life cycle where making changes is the cheapest. If a user tries to complete a task in your prototype and cannot figure out how to do it, that is a critical information. It tells you that the design is not clear enough or the flow is not intuitive enough for that type of user. And you can fix it in the prototyping tool in just a couple of minutes or hours. If you had discovered the same problem after the product was fully built and launched, fixing it might require redesigning multiple screens, which the engineering would need to implement, which take days or weeks and delay the launch accordingly. Now, the way you test a prototype is very important. And I want to kind of give you a specific technique that product managers use in prototype testing session. Can consider this a bonus, right? You sit a real user down in front of the prototype and you give them a specific task to complete. Something like, imagine you want to transfer money to a friend. Use this app to do that. Use this app to try and transfer money to a friend. And then you watch them use the app. At this point, you do not help them. Just allow them to click the wrong buttons, click the right buttons. However, let them use the app. You do not tell them what to do, what buttons to press. You just quietly sit there and observe. And whatever they hesitate, whatever they click, right, that is not the right thing, that is the wrong thing, wherever they experience confusion, you note it down, because that moment is actually telling you where the design of that prototype is failing. And the reason you do not help them is that in the real world, when a user encounters your product for the first time, you will not be there to help them. You will not be there to assist them in using your product. The product has to communicate itself clearly enough that first, for the first time that a user is using it, that product has to communicate itself clearly enough that first instant, that first time, right? The first time user should be able to navigate it without any external guidance. If your test users need guidance to complete basic tasks, those tasks are not yet designed well enough for a real-world launch. You need to fix the design and run another prototype test with a different set of users and repeat it until users can complete their primary tasks confidently and independently. Now, as the PM, your role at this stage is to stay closely connected to both the concept testing feedback and the prototype testing feedback, and to make sure that every insight from those sessions gets translated into specific design improvements. You're kind of like the link between what the users are telling you they need and what the design team is producing. You are also the person who has to make the call when the prototype feedback suggests that, a fundamental aspect of the concept needs to change. That call requires enough amount of courage, especially if the team has already invested significant time in the current direction. But making it at stage 4 is always better than making it at stage 7 or stage 8, no matter how difficult it might be to point out. That is why I said it takes or requires a lot of courage. I hope we are still together. Now, moving on to stage 5, planning and requirement definition. Planning and requirement definition So I want to begin by making a claim that might surprise you, right? This is the stage that has one of the highest leverage of any stage in the PDLC, the planning and requirements stage. The quality of work done in stage 5 determines the quality, speed, and cost of everything that happens in stage 6, 7, and 8. A stage 5 done well means that stage 6 development proceeds smoothly with clear direction, minimal ambiguity, and fewer costly mid-development changes of direction. A stage 5 done poorly means stage 6 development is constantly interrupted by unclear requirements, conflicting interpretations, scope changes, and rework that erodes timelines and budgets. There is a well-established principle in software engineering called the rule of 10, which states that the cost of fixing a problem multiplies by a factor of 10 for each stage of the development process at which it is discovered. Now, a problem found during requirement definition costs 1 unit to fix. The same problem found during design costs 10 units. Found during development, it costs 100 units. If it's found during testing, it costs 1,000 units. If it is found after launch, it costs 10,000 units. So stage 5 is requirement definition. This is the cheapest possible point at which you're able to catch and fix every misunderstanding, every ambiguity, and every conflicting assumptions. And the tool for catching them is the product requirement document. Now, the PRD, product requirement document, right, is the most important document produced during the planning stage and one of the most important documents in the entire life cycle of a product. Now, let me be very precise about what a PRD is and what it is not. A PRD is not a technical specification. It does not describe. Now, I am talking about this, but as we proceed, right, we are still going to have a class that talks about product requirement document. So this is just going to brush it through. So, right, a PRD is not a technical specification. It does not describe how the product will be built. This is not the engineering team's job and the output of their technical planning process, right? A PRD describes what the product must accomplish for the user in clear, unambiguous terms that can be understood by anyone on the team, regardless of their technical background, right? A PRD answers the question, what does this product need to do, not how will it do it? I hope that answers us on PRD. Okay, so let's continue. Let's talk about resource plan. Now, your resource plan covers the people, time, tools, and budgets required to build the product. How many engineers are needed? What specific technical skills do they need? How long will it take? How long will it take for them to develop, given the scope and the requirements? What design tools, right? What development tools and testing infrastructures are needed? That's the resource planning. Now, getting the resource plan right requires close collaboration with the engineering and design leadership on your team. The PM defines the requirements. The engineering team estimates the efforts required to meet those requirements. The design team estimates the time needed to design the user experience interface. Now, together, the team builds a plan that is both ambitious enough to be meaningful and realistic enough to be achievable. The most common and most costly mistake at stage 5 is starting development before the requirements are clearly documented and agreed upon by all relevant teams. Now, the mistake happens constantly, even in experienced product organizations. The pressure to start building, to show progress, to hit a very interesting deadline often pushes the team to begin development while requirements are still very, very ambiguous and very incomplete. Now, the result is that engineers make assumptions about what they should build. Those assumptions, right, later are usually found to be incorrect, and the work has to be redone. We have to start all over, rework during development, and all of that. And reworking during development is one of the most expensive forms of waste in product development process. The time spent on thorough, disciplined, and the time spent to write quality codes is now like it is doubled, and that is a lot of work for your engineering team, right? So we'll move ahead to stage 6, design, UX and UI. Now we have arrived at stage 6, and I want to start by addressing something that trips up almost every beginner and a surprising number of experienced professionals. The product manager does not design the product. I need us to be very clear on that, right? Because I have seen PMs who try to control the visual, right? The visual of designs of a product in ways that undermines the designer's expertise and sometimes slows down the design process. The designer designs, the PM reviews, provide feedbacks, and ensures that the design serves the users and aligns with the requirements. These are completely different activities. And in some teams and in some cases, the PM might not even get to review, except the PM is somebody who is knowledgeable in design. If not, the lead designer, plays that role, okay? That said, you need to understand design deeply enough to review it meaningfully if you are a PM. If you do not understand design, focus on your PM role and let your lead designer do the reviewing. This does not mean that you're not going to chip in 1 or 2 color suggestions or some corrections in alignment and placement, but it is not your job role to give design corrections if you do not understand design deeply enough to do so, right? But it is also advised that you are able to understand design, you're able to give some feedback and, just say some useful and specific things, right? Now, saying things like this does not look right is not a useful feedback. Please, I need us to take notes. Maybe you're presented with a design, maybe you're having a demo and you go about saying, this does not look right. That's not a useful feedback. The designer will not know what to do with that feedback, right? Saying the primary call to action button on the screen is competing visually with 3 other elements of similar size and color, which means the user will not immediately know where to focus their attention to complete the task they came here to do. All of that. Stating your points that clearly, that is how to give a useful feedback, not just saying this does not make sense. You have to be detailed enough so that is if you are experienced enough to review a design, right? If you're experienced enough and you're reviewing a design, you have to give a very detailed feedback. Now, one of those responses move the design forward, the other wastes everybody's time, because if you go and tell your designer, this does not make sense, or this does not look okay, your designer is going to spend time thinking, what does she mean, or what does he mean, and all of that. That's waste of time. But if your details are specific enough, it just sends them back on track, right? They know what they are looking out for, they know what they are correcting, what they are redoing, and all of that. So it pushes everybody forward. So let's make sure you understand the design process well enough to be a genuinely useful participant in it. At stage 6, right? Design happens. It happens in 2 distinct layers, and they must be done in this specific order. UX design, which stands for user experience design. That is what happens first, right? Then UI design, which stands for user interface design, and that happens second. The reason for this order is important and logical. UX design determines how the product works. And how does the product work? How does the user navigate from one part of the product to another? What is the sequence of steps a user takes to complete each primary task? How is the information organized within each screen? Right? How does the product respond when the user makes an error? All of these structural and behavioral questions must be answered before anyone spends time making decisions about how the product looks, which is the UI. Because if the structure is wrong, the visual design built on top of that structure will also be wrong, right? And all of that visual designs might have to be reworked or redone. Now, user flows are the first output of the UX design process. A user flow is a visual map. Now, once again, we are going to have a class where we look at user flows, right? So this is just to wrap the PDLC topic together. Now, user flows are the first output of the UX design process. A user flow is a visual map of the path a user takes through the product to complete a specific task. It shows every screen the user passes through, every decision point where the user must choose between options, and every error state the user might encounter. User flow makes the logic of the product very explicit and visual, which makes it easy for the team to evaluate whether the intended path is the same as the the information that they have, or is efficient as it needs to be. A well-designed user flow for the most important tasks in your product should feel immediately obvious when you look at it. The path should be short. The decisions the user must make along should be very clear and very intuitive. The error states should be handled very, very gracefully with helpful guidance rather than technical error messages alone. In as much as you add your technical error message, it should also come with helpful guidance. If you look at a user flow and it feels complicated, it is because it is complicated. And complication in a user flow is always a problem that needs to be solved before the product is built. Every unnecessary step in a user flow is a point at which, some percentage of users will abandon the task. They will abandon the task and they will log out unapologetically of your product, right? So removing unnecessary steps and simplifying necessary ones is one of the highest value activities in the entire design process. Wireframes are the next output. A wireframe is a basic, typically black and white structural layout of a specific screen in the product. Now, do I have any designer on this call? If you're a designer, just raise your hand. Let me see it. Do we have any designer on this call? We don't. Yeah. Okay. Who is that? Adana, you're a designer. Okay, so right. So you understand everything I'm saying. In Obong, you're a designer, hear me. Oh, okay. Great. Okay. Great. So you guys understand all my jargons. That's nice. So it shows where each element on the screen will be positioned, how much space it will take up, and what the hierarchy of information on the screen will be. Now, wireframes do not have colors. You need to note that. Brand colors, brand elements, vinyl, typography, or visual polish, they don't have all of those things, right? They are just skeletons of the interface. Now, the pure structure without visual layers, right? You just use lines and circles on them. The value of wireframe is that they allow the team to evaluate and refine the structure of each screen without being distracted by visual design choices, right? I feel like in this day and age, some designers, they skip their wireframes, right? But if you have a PM who is very big on the process, who is very particular about process, your PM will not allow you to skip your wireframes because it is very, very important. When we head straight to the high fidelity and we start seeing colors, we start seeing shapes and designs and images, it throws off guard. It takes our attention off of the things that we should pay attention to. So wireframes are very, very necessary. Their value is very necessary. You can look at a wireframe and ask questions like, is it the most important information that is supposed to be here? Is this information prominent? Is the primary action the user needs to take easy to find and easy to execute? Is there unnecessary information on this screen that is creating, some cognitive load for the user? Is the layout logical and consistent with the other screens in the product? All of that, right? All of these questions are easier to answer in a wireframe than in a fully designed screen because you are not distracted by color, you're not distracted by imagery and visual styles. Now, information architecture is the overall structure and organization of the product's content and functionality. It answers questions like, so don't worry too much about all of these things because at some point you might not need to use them, right? At some point you might use them, at some point you might not. So don't worry too much. Like I said, some of these things that I am mentioning is just to put together the PDLC. As we proceed, some of them might be topics on their own. As we proceed, we are going to talk about information architecture on its own, right? So don't worry about me being brief about them. So information architecture, I said, is the overall structure and organization of the product's content, right? It helps you answer questions like, how is the product divided into sections? What are those sections called? How does the user navigate between them? What does each type of content or functionality, where does it live in the overall structure? A good information architecture is invisible to the user because it feels so natural and obvious that they never have to think about it. But a bad information architecture is painfully visible because users spend time searching for things they cannot find. If you have an idea of what an information architecture looks like visually, you understand what I mean. You have to start searching, start going from one place to another to look for something, and that is a very bad information architecture. Now, after the UX design is complete and has been reviewed and approved, the UI design layer is then applied. UI design is about how the product looks, the color palette, the typography, the spacing and padding, the visual styles of the buttons, icons, and other interface elements. Now, the use of imagery and illustration comes in here. The visual hierarchy comes in here, which is the use of size, the use of colors, the use of contrast, and positioning to basically communicate to the user which elements on a screen are most important and should receive their attention first. Now, a good UI design does three things simultaneously. It communicates the brand's personality and values through visual choices, right? It makes the interface as clear and easy to read as possible. And it creates a visual experience that feels appropriate for the context in which the product is used. A financial application should feel trustworthy. It should feel professional and secure through its visual design. While an entertainment application can feel more playful, more expressive, and more energetic, right? These are not some abstract aesthetic choices, right? They are detailed communications about the product's character that users receive and interpret before they have interacted with a single feature. Now, as the PM, you participate in design review throughout the entire process, whether you're the one reviewing or not. You will not leave your designers alone to review with the design lead or with the product owner, right? Whatever meeting is going on as the PM, you are going to be a part of it. It is also a learning curve, right? Remember, I said that as a product manager, you get to pick up some skills along the way because you're always involved. You're always involved in PR reviews, you're always involved in design reviews. So you get to hear some design talks, some technical talks. So you pick up some skills along the way. Now, so you're always available to participate in design reviews throughout the entire process. But I would like to give you specific guidance on how to give design feedback that is, constructive and useful rather than vague and frustrating. I think I already mentioned this. Now, as a PM, some good feedback on a design is always grounded in one of three things: the product requirements, the user research from stage 3, or specific observation from prototype testing in stage 4. If you are about to give feedback on a design, ask yourself first, am I saying this because it conflicts with a documented requirement? Am I saying this because it contradicts something we learned about the user in our research? Or am I saying this because it does not match my personal aesthetic reference or my personal visual reference? The first two are very valid reasons to give feedback and to ask for changes. The third one is not. Your personal aesthetic choice, your personal preference is not something that should come into a product, right? Except your personal preference is better than what the product has. If it is not, please and please and please do not bring your personal preference into your product. right? The first two is a very high and valid reason to give a feedback or to ask for a change. But the last one, which is your personal aesthetic preference, it is not, right? Your personal aesthetic preference are not a design standard, right? Except you are a designer or you have groomed your design skills so well that you know that you, to some extent, know better than the person designing. That is when you can bring in your preference, okay? Now, the user's needs and the product's requirements are the standard, always, not your preference. Okay, let us move on. Our time is rushing. Okay, we have stage 6, which is development and agile. Give me a second. Okay. All right, so development is the stage that most people think of when they imagine building a product, right? This is where engineers open their computers, write their code, connect systems, and transform the designs from stage 10 into, a working product. And while development is primarily, please, I'm getting network notifications. Give me a thumbs up if you can still hear me and see my screen. All right, thank you. Thank you very much. So, while development is primarily the engineering team's domain, the product manager is deeply involved in also, orchestrating and directing this stage throughout its entire duration. Now, let me explain how development actually works in a modern product team, because the reality is very different from the way most beginners sometimes imagine it. Most modern product teams within a framework called Agile. As we proceed, I'm also going to spend more time to talk about Agile. Agile is not a single specific process, right? It is a philosophy and a set of principles about how to manage complex, uncertain work. But in practice, the most common specific implementation of Agile in product development is a structure called Scrum. And within Scrum, the fundamental unit of work is the sprint. A sprint is a fixed length period, most commonly 2 weeks, during which the team commits to building a specific set of features or functionalities, right? And then you have something called the cycle. Okay, you have something called the cycle, but before we get into cycle, at the end of every sprint, the team reviews what was built. Remember, I said the sprint is like, a fixed length period, which is usually 2 weeks. So at the end of every sprint, the team reviews what was built, demonstrates it to some relevant stakeholders, and the product manager evaluates whether it meets the requirements and whether it is approved. And then this cycle, right? The cycle that sounds very simple. You build for 2 weeks, review, repeat, and then it's basically a cycle, you rinse and repeat. But the value of this approach is profound and non-obvious if you have not experienced it. The reason it works so well is that it creates frequent, regular opportunities to check alignment between the engineering team, right? Check what the engineering team is building. And in a 2 week sprint, if the team builds in the wrong direction or misinterprets a requirement, right, that mistake is discovered after 2 weeks right? And then you can fix it. 2 weeks of effort is easy to fix than a 6 months of effort. And the cost of correcting a 2 weeks mistake is not as costly or as expensive as correcting that of 6 weeks. Okay, we are not going to dwell too much on this. So let's talk about stage 7, testing and quality assurance. Now, I want to start this section with a statement that is both completely obvious and somehow consistently ignored by teams under the pressure to launch. A product that is not tested adequately is not ready for launch. As you can hear, it's very obvious, right? But people tend to miss it. A product that is not fully tested is not ready for launch, full stop. No exceptions, no matter how tight the deadline is, no matter how much competitive pressure you have going on, no matter your deadline, right? No matter how much the product owner is holding you as a PM on your neck, you are not permitted to launch a product that you have not tested because you're going to fall your hand to the public, right? Now, let me explain why. First impression really matters. As far as your product is concerned, first impression matters so much in product launches. When a user tries your product for the first time, they are forming an evaluation of whether your product can be reliable and trustworthy, right, for their continued attention. If the product works well in the first encounter, the user's default assumption becomes positive, right? They are inclined to give it a fair chance to explore, more features and to, be a returning customer and return to it. But if the product fails in the first encounter, whether through a crash, right, a confusing error message or a failed transaction, or even a feature that, simply does not work as described, the user's assumption of your product becomes a negative one. And negative first impressions are extraordinarily difficult to reverse. Users who have a bad first experience rarely come back to give you a second chance. They simply find an alternative. Sometimes almost immediately. It happens to me. If I'm looking for an application that does a particular thing, I head over to my Play Store or my Apple Store, I download it, install, and then I try to use it. It's not giving me what I want. Immediately I install it and then I find another option, right? So they will find an alternative almost immediately and they will never return to your product. So this is why testing is not optional and it is very important regardless of what external pressures you are getting. The PM's job is to understand this clearly and communicate it very firmly to stakeholders, to engineers, to anybody that is trying to push you to launch before testing is completed. You need to be able to stand your ground and to, disagree very firmly that you have to complete your test period, right? Now, let me walk you through the 4 types of testing that should happen before any product launch. Now, unit testing is the most granular form of testing, and it is conducted by engineers themselves. Please note when I say engineers, I'm referring to your developers, right? It's conducted by engineers themselves. In unit testing, individual components of the code are tested in isolation to verify that each component produces the correct output for every valid input and handles invalid inputs gracefully. A unit test for a function that calculates a user's account balance would test that function with let's say, a variety of input combination, including edge cases like, a balance of 0, a large balance, and a balance of multiple currencies to confirm that the function produces the correct result in every scenario. Unit test cases are typically automated, right? Meaning they run automatically every time a change is made to the code. They alert the team immediately if a change has broken something that was previously working. The PM does not typically review individual test units, but they should understand that unit testing is happening, right? Like what I mean by that is you might not go about I mean, as a PM, you might not go about telling your developers, okay, give me every unit of your code, I want to test them. No, but you should be aware of each unit, right, that is being tested. If there's any part that is not working and your dev guys are currently testing, you should be in the know, right? You should be able to understand that there's a test happening and you should be able to ask the engineering team about the coverage and the results of the unit test as part of their regular sprint engagement. Now we have integration testing. This is where the team tests that all of the individual components that were built and unit tested in isolation work correctly when they are connected to each other. Unit testing is one by one. Integration testing is when you bring all of those units together and they work the way they are supposed to work, right? This type of testing is critical because it is extremely common for a component that works perfectly on its own to produce incorrect or unexpected results when it is connected to another component, right? Now the payment, let's say the payment processing component might work correctly on its own. The order management component might work correctly on its own as well. But when a user completes a purchase, the order management system must communicate correctly with the payment processing system, which must communicate correctly with the external payment gateway, which must also communicate correctly back with the order management system to confirm the transaction. Now, integration testing checks all of those connections under realistic conditions and identifies the points where the connection fails or produces unexpected results. Please give me a thumbs up if you're still following. I hope I am not talking to myself. Okay, all right, guys, well done. So moving on to the next one, which is the user acceptance testing, UAT, is, the stage of testing that is most directly connected to the PM's core responsibility of ensuring that the product delivers real value, right, to real users. UAT is not about testing whether the codes are working. It is about testing whether the product does what the user needs it to do. And those are not the same question. A product can be technically functional in every way and still completely fail to serve the user's needs if the design of the user experience was wrong, if the requirements were misinterpreted during development, or if the real-world use of the product reveals needs that were not captured during some earlier research stages. In a typical UAT process, a selected group of users, sometimes internal employees who represent the target user profile, and sometimes actual external users recruited for the purpose of testing, are given a set of tasks to complete using their products in a controlled but realistic environment. The PM and possibly members of the design team, they get to observe the testing sessions and note every place where the user struggles. Now, fail to complete a task where they fail to where they are having confusions or frustration, where they are not successful and where they fail to complete a task the way they are supposed to, they get to jot down all of those pain points. And the result of UAT typically produces a list of issues that needs to be addressed before launch, ranging from critical failures that prevent users from completing key tasks to minor friction, right? Those friction points that reduces the quality of the experience without preventing task completion. And we also have beta testing. Beta testing takes the product out of the controlled testing environment into the real world for the first time. And this is not a launch, right? This is still testing. So it takes it out to the real world for the first time, but in a limited and managed way. A beta is a pre-release version of the product that is made available to a small selected group of real users who use it in their actual daily lives, on their actual devices, in their actual environments. Now, the purpose of beta testing is to expose the products to real world conditions, right? Real world internet connectivity and the rest. Now, real devices have different operating system versions, different hardware specifications, and different configurations. Real users are going to interact with the product in unexpected ways to reveal assumptions, right? The design team, either assumptions made by the design team or assumptions made by the dev, right? Yeah, and then bug prioritization is one of the PM core responsibility as well. Now, during the testing stage, there's a judgment that it requires, and that is the bug prioritization. When testing produces a list of bugs and issues, now bugs means that let's say the product is supposed to, you're about to sign in, but instead of signing, it takes you back to the splash screen. So that is a bug, right? It means something is not working very well. So that is a bug. Right? When testing produces a list of bugs and issues, not all of them are equally important. Some are critical. A critical bug is one that prevents user from completing a key task, right? That causes data loss or security vulnerabilities. Maybe your login, your sign-in, your complete transaction, and all of that. Either that or it's one that causes products to crash in high frequency scenarios. Let's say, I don't know if you've ever had to use an application, then while you're midway into using the application, the application crashes, like it just shuts down. It takes you back to your home page or something. It just crashes, right? So that is a bug that happened at a high frequency level, right? Now, other bugs are significant but are not critical. They degrade the user experience in meaningful ways, but not prevent users from completing their key tasks, right? Maybe it is slow loading, or images are not loading fast, text are not loading fast. Those ones are, they are bugs, but they are not as critical. You can still do what you're supposed to do, right? They degrade your experience, but they do not exactly stop you from having those experiences. And then minor bugs affect edge cases, right? They have some workaround around that one, right? Or have impact so small that most users may not even notice them. So those are also bugs, but they are not as huge as the critical ones. All right, let's move on. Moving on to launch and go to market strategy. Now, launch is the moment that everyone on the product team has been working towards, the moment that everybody has been working so hard for. After months of research, after months of planning, design, development, and testing, the product is about to meet real users for the first time. And I want to acknowledge that this is genuinely an exciting stage and an exciting moment for PMs, for the dev guys, and for the designers, right? This is an exciting moment. The energy around a well-executed launch is one of the most motivating experiences in product management, I promise you. But I also want to be very direct about something, because the way you approach launch will determine whether you are effective in the hours, days, and weeks immediately following. Now, launch, you should understand, is not a finish line. Launch is actually a starting line. Everything that happens before launch was preparation. Launch is where the real test begins. Let me explain, right? A proper launch actually involves a significantly more complex and more demanding work, because most beginners, well, they expect that after launch everything should be settled, but it is not always like that, right? Because the quality of the launch execution directly determines how many users you have acquired, how many of them are going to stay, and how the product is perceived in the market. Now, the first decision you need to make about your launch is whether to begin with a soft launch or go directly to a full launch. A soft launch means you go, now this is not a beta launch, this is soft launch. So don't confuse this and beta. Right now, a soft launch means you release the product to a small, specific, defined audience before releasing it to your entire target market. The audience might be a specific geographic region, right? It might be a specific user segment. It might be a specific cohort of users who have been on a wait list if it is that kind of product, right? The purpose of a soft launch is to expose the product to real-world conditions and real user behavior on a small controlled scale, so that any critical issue that emerges can be addressed before they affect your entire user base. Now, let me give you a concrete picture of why soft launch matters sometimes. Now, imagine you have spent 8 months building a payment application. You have done everything right through all of the stages, stage 1 through 7, right? But when real users start using it in real world, a specific combination of device model and operating system versions that you did not test on or test with causes the payment confirmation screen to freeze. If you soft launch to 10, let's say 10,000 users, you discover this issue affecting a small number of users in your beta, you fix it before the launch. And the other 90,000 users in your full launch scale, right? They never get to experience, they never get to experience that. So that's, one of the benefits of soft launch. Okay. So let's move on to post-launch evaluation and iteration. So at this point, we have arrived at stage 9, which is the final stage of the PDLC. And I want to start by saying that this is an interesting stage as well. In many ways, stage 9 is the most important stage of the entire life cycle, not because it is the most technically complex or most demanding in terms of coordination, but because it is the stage where you find out the truth about your product. Yes, you might be wondering, so I still don't know the truth about my product up to now. Well, this is the stage where you get all of that together. You find out the truth about your product. Everything before this was your best, right? Your most rigorous research, most carefully planned, educated guesses about what users need and how they will behave. Stage 9 is where reality either confirms your guess or challenges it, and where the team that responds most honestly and most intelligently to that reality ultimately wins. Now, let me start by saying something clearly about the nature of product development that I want you to carry for the rest of your career. No product, no matter how well researched, how carefully designed, how rigorously tested, launches exactly the way the team expected. Features that the team were certain users would love sometimes turn out to be underused. Features that almost got cut from, the release, the first release, turns out to be the ones users talk about most, right? The ones they get to use the most. Users find ways to use a product that the team never anticipated. If you build a product, when you're using it, subconsciously you are only going to be using the things that you feel the product, should be doing. But for a user who is not part of your development team, who is not part of your team, is going to use it in different ways, clicking buttons that they are not even supposed to click, touching things they are not supposed to touch, until they go to discover something that, really, I love this, right? And you probably never added much thoughts to that, but they find it and they love it. So those unexpected behaviors, both the positive surprises and frustrating failures, are the most valuable lessons the product team will receive at this stage. Now, the team that builds great products are not the teams that plan perfectly before launch. They are the teams that learned the fastest after launch and improve the most, right? The PDLC is a cycle precisely because learning never stops and improvement never ends. So, we're not going to dwell too much on this. I would like for us, before we call today's class a close, I'd like for us to do a bit of an introduction to Agile, Scrum, Kanban, Sprint, and Backlog. So this is a new topic. We are officially done with the product development life cycle. So I just want us to, talk just maybe a slide or two about this. So Agile is one of those words that gets used constantly in tech environments, in job descriptions, in interviews, and daily stand-ups. Well, yet some people who use it every single day cannot give you a clear, accurate definition of what it actually means. They will tell you it means we move fast, or we are flexible, or we do sprints and all of that. Now, those answers, they're not entirely wrong, but they are incomplete in a way that matters. Today, I want to try and give you a complete and accurate understanding that is not just surface vocabulary, but when you walk into a product role, your product owner or stakeholders will expect that you already know what this means. So let's just get right into it. I would really, really advise that after now, we spend time to go over the YouTube class and go over this particular topic again, right? So that we can have a better understanding. So why did Agile come to exist? What problem was it solving? Now, to understand why Agile matters, you first need to understand what people were doing before it existed and why it was causing so much pain. The dominant approach to building software before Agile was a method called waterfall. And I just want to put it out there. The reason why we are looking at a new topic today is because we have missed a couple of class. We missed a class on Tuesday last week. So that is why we are looking at a new topic today, at least just introducing it. And then on Thursday, we are going to delve right into it. So there was a method called waterfall. And I want you to understand it deeply because you will encounter it in conversations throughout your career in comparison to Agile, and sometimes as the actual method a company is still using. Waterfall is a linear sequential approach to building a product. The word sequential is the critical one, right? It means you complete one phase entirely before you are allowed to begin the next. Note, I use the word allowed, right? The phases kind of look something like this. First, you gather every single requirement from the client or stakeholder, every feature, every specification, every edge cases, all of it. And then second, based on those requirements, the architects design the system. Then third, once the design is signed off, they start to work on the entire design, and then the engineers build the entire product. And then once it is fully built, the testers start testing it. And then if it passes testing, you deploy it. And 6, you maintain it. Each phase flows downward into the next, like, water over a waterfall. That is literally where the name comes from. Now, here's the critical problem with this approach. And I want you to, pay attention closely. In a waterfall project, users do not see the product until it is completely finished, right? Think about what that means. It means a team will spend 6 months gathering requirements, another 3 months designing, another 12 months building, and then 2 months max testing, and then they deploy. This is potentially 18 months or 2 years of work before a single real user touches the product. And then one of two things can happen. Either the product is exactly what the user needs, which is rare because human needs and market condition changes over those 18 months or 2 years that you have wasted in building the product, right? Or the product is built perfectly, but it is the wrong product because what users said they needed in, a month ago is different from what they need now. The user's context has changed, but your team was still building in the old context. Now, this is a famous story. There's this famous story in the software industry about a large American insurance company that spent 3 years and hundreds of millions of dollars building a new claims, processing system using a waterfall approach. When they finally launched it, the system was technically flawless. But in the 3 years since the requirements had been gathered, regulations had changed. The company had merged with another organization, and the process it was built to support had been redesigned. The system was built perfectly, it just did not fit the world it was being launched into anymore. And they had to scrap most of it and start all over. That is the downside of the waterfall approach. Now, the developers who were building products in the 1990s were living in this experience repeatedly, and they were deeply frustrated with it. These were intelligent, skilled people building things as well as, they could possibly build. And yet the results were consistently missing the mark because the process required them to commit to a complete plan up front. In a domain where requirements change consistently and where the only way to know if you have built the right thing is to put it in front of a real user and watch what happens, this is a very wrong approach. Now, in September 2000, a man named Robert C. Martins, also known in the software community as Uncle Bob, sent an email to a group of software practitioners he respected. He proposed a small conference of 2 days in early 2001, bringing together all the leaders of what were then called lightweight method. These were alternative approaches to waterfall that different teams had been experimenting with, right? Teams called their approaches like extreme programming, Scrum, Crystal, and adaptive software development. They each had different specific practices, but they were all trying to solve the same fundamental problem, which was how do they build software in a way that adapts to change rather than fighting change. Now, the group settled on a location, which was the Snowbird Ski Resort in the Wasatch Mountain of Utah. And from February 11 to 13th, 2001, 17 software practitioners checked into the lodge, sat down together in a room. The room was called the Aspen Room, and began listening to each other. The likes of Karen, one of the participants, later remembered it this way. He said, and I quote, "We left our egos at the door." Alistair Cookburn, another participant, described what they were practicing as generous listening. They were not there to argue for their individual approaches because they all had their individual approaches. They were there to find, the common ground, and they found it. By the end of that weekend, they had written a short 68-word statement of value that they called the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. It will change how software is built everywhere in the world. And that was a very interesting meeting. Now, I want to try and spend... our time is fast spent. You know what? This is the 4 core values of Agile. We are going to continue here in our next class. So let's call it a close over here so I do not overload you. So let's call it a close. We are going to stop here, and in our next class, we will continue from the Agile Manifesto, the 4 core values of Agile. So at this point, do we have a question? I'm going to take questions now. If you're still with me, kindly give me a thumbs up. Give me a thumbs up so that I know that I wasn't left alone talking to myself. Okay, do we have questions? All right, thank you very much, guys. You guys are the best. Do well to go over the recording again after now. All right, so after now, go over the recording. You can ask questions on the channel, and I am going to be there to respond. Thank you very much.